Hello everybody, and welcome to Over the Curve podcast. What is this podcast about? This is a podcast by Formula One fans, new and old, for Formula One fans, new and old. I am Mansi. I will be hosting this podcast for now alone. Hopefully, that would change in the future. I started watching Formula One in 2020 after I watched Drive to Survive, and ever since then, I have kind of been sucked into this world. And yeah, I just love talking about Formula One. I love finding out new things and learning new things that are happening in Formula One. And I always wanted to have a podcast, and so I decided that maybe I should just start talking about Formula One. This is what the podcast is going to be about. Every episode, I'll be covering some particular aspects of Formula One, or maybe like race reviews of Formula One, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. For this episode, I thought that I would just cover a basic understanding of what happens on a typical Formula One race weekend. So a race weekend starts from Friday. Friday is when we start seeing on track action, where we actually see cars on track. But there are certain number of other activities that start on Thursday, and so essentially a Formula One weekend lasts from Thursday to Sunday, and we are going to delve into all these sessions that happen a little deeper. In terms of the events, the sessions that happen on track, every Formula One weekend will have 5 sessions. So ever since 2021, we also have something called as a sprint weekend and then a normal Formula One weekend. The number of sessions are essentially the same. What happens in the session is a little bit different, and I will be covering both of them. There are 5 sessions that happen on track. There are 2 on Friday, there are 2 on Saturday, and the one on Sunday, which is going to be the actual race. So let's dive deeper into every single day and the sessions that happen on each of these days. So first, let's talk about Thursday. What happens on Thursday? So Formula One, every season has somewhere around 20 plus races that happen across locations throughout the world. And every week, the entire circus moves from one city to another to prepare for the next race weekend. So there is a lot of preparation aspect that happens on Thursday. Thursday, there is an advance team that comes to the place where the race is going to happen, to the track where it is going to happen, and they set up the garage and they set up their cars. The cars, when they're transported from one place to another, are essentially stripped down and dismantled. And then, when you come to the new city where the race is going to happen, they are assembled there again. So the team that works in the background, the engineering team and the garage team, the advanced team, they work on this. What do the drivers do? The drivers on Thursday have their driver conferences. These are mandatory press appearances that the drivers have to do, and there is something called as a track walk that happens. Track walk is drivers along with their engineering teams walk around the track to find out about bumps and evaluate the curves and the braking points, to get an idea of how they should be driving the car on the track during the sessions that are going to happen from Friday onwards. So largely this is what happens on a Thursday. There's a lot more that the teams in the background do than the drivers. And then we move on to Friday. Friday, there are 2 sessions that happen, which are free practices. Free practice 1 and free practice 2. Free practices because there are no limitations on what tires they can use, what setups they can use. There is no restriction or what parts they can use in their car. There are no restrictions that are imposed on the teams. So that's why these sessions are called free practice sessions. Before the free practice session, there is something called as installation labs that happen. So because the car has been built again after it's been transported, um, there are installation labs that happen to make sure that the assembling of the car has been done right. There are also some testing pods and everything added on the car so that you can get data about the car's performance. Now, once the free practice starts, the free practice is essentially the teams and the drivers trying out different tires. Um, they try out any new parts that they've been developing. They basically gather the performance data for the car, corner speed, straight line speeds, braking performances, all these sort of things are collected as form of data, and based on the data and the performance of the car and the feedback from the driver, the teams decide on their racing strategy, what suspension geometry they're going to have, what aerodynamic setup they're going to have, what is the braking pressure going to be. A lot of these things depend on the car's performance and how the driver wants their setup to be. There are a lot of drivers who have very different driving styles. So free practice 1 and free practice 2 are largely used for these purposes. In these sessions, we can also see younger drivers being given a chance to have some experience and exposure to driving in Formula One. I think this year it is mandatory for every team to have one or two younger driver, and they need to be given some time in the car. I'm not sure on what the requirements are, but this year we'll be seeing a lot more of that happening on track. So yes, the teams learn about the car performance. They also do longer runs, which is essentially you fit on the tire, you have a setup, and then you complete more than one lap. Longer runs help teams determine what the tire degradation is. Tire degradation and the car performance and all these data, all this plethora of data combined is going to help the teams and the drivers to form their race strategies. Um, so largely this is what happens in a free practice session that happens on Friday. And now we move on to Saturday. Saturday, the morning session is again a free practice session, but here the teams and the drivers are largely focused on their qualifying strategy. Qualifying strategy is a little bit different than the racing strategy because the qualifying session determines the grid positions for all the cars for the race. So you obviously want to start as ahead of the rest of the pack as possible. So usually in the qualifying sessions, we see the cars being pushed to the limit because you have to be as fast as you can to gain the maximum advantage that you can get with respect to your track position. So in this free practice session, the teams determine, in terms of their qualifying strategy, they're going to determine how much fuel they're supposed to use, how many runs they're supposed to do. Is there a particular time where you would be able to avoid traffic, if you can get a tow from an opponent. So all these things are being decided in the free practice sessions, largely towards the qualifying strategy. Once this session is over, now, okay, before we move on to that, all these practice sessions are going to be 90 minutes. They used to be 60 until last year, but this year we have seen a lot of new changes in the aerodynamic regulations, and I think the teams would benefit from having a longer duration of free practice because there's a lot of development that is going to happen throughout the year. What with the testing of new and innovative parts that all the teams are going to bring to the table. Now we get to the qualifying. The qualifying, as I said, is going to determine the grid start positions for all the cars for the race that is going to happen on Sunday. The qualifying has three sessions that happen: Q1, Q2, and Q3. Q1 session is around 20 minutes. So what happens is every car is going to put in their best lap times in that stipulated duration of a Q1 session. Now, once that stipulated time is over, the slowest 5 cars are going to get eliminated in that session, and out of those 5 cars, the fastest one will start 16th, and then the next one will be 17th, and so on till 20th. So after Q3, we get the position of who is going to start 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Q2 session similarly will determine the positions 11 to 15. Same thing, 15-minute long session. The cars put in their fastest time. The times from Q1 are not going to count in this. And the cars determine the slowest 5 cars are going to get eliminated, and that is going to define the positions 11 to 15. And then you have the Q3 session. Q3 session is 12 minutes long. Um, it is there are going to be only 10 cars that will be participating in that session, and after those 12 minutes, the top 10 positions will be decided from fastest to slowest. So the slowest car in that session would start 10th, and the fastest car would start first. So this is what the qualifying is. Now before we proceed to the race itself that happens on Sunday, there is something called as Parc Ferme conditions. So a car enters Parc Ferme conditions at the start of the qualifying. What this means is basically the the cars are essentially going to stay the same. There is going to be no modification allowed in the cars until the finish of the race weekend. Can you modify the car? No. Can you repair the car? Yes. Repairs can take place as long as the teams make sure that any part that is being repaired or replaced by a similar part of similar specifications. You can't make the teams can't make any changes in terms of part specifications during the Parc Ferme conditions. So when teams do test new devices or new parts in FP1 and FP2, they want to have that in their car. They have to make sure that those changes are incorporated in the car before the start of the qualifying session, because after qualifying you won't be able to modify the car. There are changes that are, like I said, there are repairs that you can do. Some repairs like a gearbox change or an engine change are going to incur a penalty even if they needed to be changed because of an incident that happened in qualifying. It's usually a grid position drop. So, okay, so this is what qualifying is. This is what Parc Ferme is. The teams can only work after the end of qualifying sessions. The team can only work till 3.5 hours of time on their cars, and throughout this time there are FIA scrutineers that are going to keep a very close watch as to what is being done on these cars to ensure that no teams are modifying their car in any way possible. So now we come to the race itself. Sunday, the most exciting event of the weekend, the race itself. Now, each race is going to be a little over 300 kilometers. The number of laps of any race are going to be decided by that. The race needs to follow this rule of having a 300-kilometer plus distance, and that's how the number of laps are decided. 300 divided by the track length, that is going to give you the number of laps that the race is going to have. Typically, a race lasts somewhere between 90 to 120 minutes, unless there is a session suspension due to an incident or something like that. So it can happen in a long. It can take a long time. Tire rules for the races: you have to use at least 2 different compounds for a dry race. There are different compound tires that are decided for the race. There is a stipulated allocation of tires. Each driver has to use at least two different compound tires throughout the duration of the race. Now, this rule is only for dry condition racing, which essentially is that there is no rain involved during the entire duration of the race. During a wet race, this rule is suspended because because the racing conditions are very different, and there are only two different types of wet race tires, and the use of them cannot be is only decided based on how much it is raining and what is the track condition like, and imposing this rule can be a safety hazard. So in the wet race there is no compulsion to use different tire compounds. So now we will talk about a bunch of flags that are used throughout the race. Flags are used to send different messages to the drivers on track. We'll start with the very basic one, which is a yellow flag. A yellow flag is used to tell drivers that there is something on the track, there is a danger on the track. Drivers are supposed to reduce their speeds. There is largely no overtaking allowed during a yellow flag, and the fire marshals and the team who takes care of the track are they essentially work to clear the track, be it debris on the track post an accident, or a car that is stopped on the track and you have to take it back to the pits. So those kind of things are being taken care of, and like the FI, the race director can decide that there is a safety car or a virtual safety car needed. So in a safety car situation, what happens is there is a danger on track and the safety car is deployed, which is going to come in ahead of the race leader, and all the cars have to follow the safety car. The speeds are reduced. You're not allowed to overtake the car in front of you, and the safety car is also going to, as if there's a different racing line that has to be followed, the safety car is going to make sure that the other cars know what line to follow. If there are active repairs or active marshals that are working on the track to clear the damage. There is also something called a red flag. A red flag can mean suspension of the race. Now, the suspension can be temporary or permanent. Permanent suspension, last year at least we saw it in Spa when the racing conditions were very, very bad. It was raining very badly, and then the race was suspended. Temporary suspensions can be if there is a very severe incident that has happened. We saw it in Hungary in 2021, and one of the biggest, most dangerous ones was that I saw at least was in 2020 in Sakhir after Roman Grosjean's incident. So the red flag is put out for a temporary and or a permanent suspension of the race. The cars are to return to the pit lane, and in case it's a temporary suspension and the race is going to restart, the racing director can decide if it's going to be a rolling start, which is the cars are going to follow the safety car for one or two laps, and then the safety car would come in and the racing would resume. The position would be the same positions that each of the drivers had when the red flag was employed. So that's a rolling start, and if it's a standing start, so basically the cars are going to go on track. They're going to start they're going to stand on the starting grid in the same way, with respect to their track position which is there when the red flag was employed, and then it's going to be again lights out and away we go. So those are largely the flags that are used to inform the drivers of the dangers of the track. Another commonly used flag is a blue flag. Blue flag is used to tell a slower driver that a faster car is approaching and that you need to get out of the way. What happens is the faster cars, the cars that are leading the race faster cars are eventually going to catch up to the cars at the back. So the driver who is last, there comes a point in the race. It may or may not come depending on how the race is going. But if the leader of the race has caught up with the last driver of the race, the last driver is shown a blue flag. That this tells the driver that a faster car is approaching you and that you need to leave the racing line to let that car pass. It's true when the leader comes, it's true when the second position driver comes. So it's essentially to tell a backmarker car that a faster car is approaching and that you need to leave space for them to for them to be able to race. That's a blue flag. Now there is something called as a green flag. So green flag is usually given out after a yellow flag. It's to tell the drivers that the danger has been cleared on the track and now it is safe to resume racing. Yeah, so green flag is usually deployed after a yellow flag to indicate the resumption of normal racing. Another flag is a white flag. A white flag is flown to tell the drivers on track that there is a slow moving vehicle present on the track. So from what I have researched, it is shown when there is a medical car or an ambulance on the track. But I mean, I haven't seen it being used. Mostly, if there is something so horrible that has happened that you need like an ambulance or something else to come on the track, I've usually seen that the session has been suspended temporarily. So there's a red flag out and there are no cars on the track. I hope we never get to see it, but that's what a white flag is. There's another flag called as the black flag. A black flag is usually put out with the driver number, so the person number of the driver, and a black flag indicates that the said driver has been disqualified. He has to return to the pits and that he won't be racing any further. This is usually to punish them for unsportsmanlike behavior. Before a black flag is shown, there is a possibility that you are shown a half black, half white flag to tell the driver that the behavior that they have shown is unsportsmanlike, and a half white, half black flag. If the driver does not change their racing etiquette or their racing behavior, there is a chance that it could result in a black flag. And another flag is a black flag with an orange circle. Now, this flag is shown to a driver to indicate, it's again shown with the driver number, and it is to tell the driver that there is a serious mechanical problem with the car and that driver should return to the pits so that the team can avoid a major incident happening on the track. So these are the flags, and then the final flag is the checkered flag, which is black and white checks, which denotes the end of the race. It is put out once the race leader has completed the stipulated number of laps that a car needs to do for the entire race. This is what is typically a race weekend looks like. This is how the race happens. Now we come to the driver and constructor championship. So after each race, the top 10 drivers are given points. So the first place driver is going to get 25 points. Second place would get 18. Third would get 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1. So drivers from 1 to 10 are going to get these points, and over the course of all the races in a calendar, these points are going to get accumulated, and the driver at the end of the season with the maximum number of points wins the world driver championship. The last defending champion of the world driver championship is Max Verstappen for Red Bull Racing, and similarly, since each team has two drivers, so the points of both the drivers throughout the course of the season are added together to have a constructor championship and construct and then so there is a world driver championship and there is a world constructor championship, and that's how these championships are decided. The last defending champions of world constructor championships are Mercedes. Now this is essentially what a typical weekend is going to look like. Since 2021, the FIA has also put out a new format of a Formula One weekend, which is the sprint racing format. So in 2021, the FIA decided three races that will follow the sprint format. So in the sprint format, what happens is that you still have 5 sessions. It's just that one practice session, there is an extra race that happens, which is called as the sprint race. So what happens is on Friday, you have an FP1, but the Friday afternoon session is going to be the qualifying session that used to happen on Saturday. So largely the FP1 is, while the teams are also going to work on getting their car performance data, their focus would also be to get a good understanding and enough data to form their qualifying strategies. And then there is going to be the qualifying session on Friday evening. Happens the same way as the normal qualifying session that happens on Saturday on a normal race weekend. Coming to Saturday, you are going to have another morning practice session, pre-practice session, and this is going to be largely focused on gathering performance data for the car, and then the afternoon session is going to be the sprint race is a 100-kilometer dash race that happens. Yeah, it's basically a 100-kilometer race that happens, and the result of the sprint qualifying is going to be the grid position for the race, and the result of the qualifying was the grid position for the sprint race. Again, the number of laps are decided in the same way as for the normal race. So 100 divided by the track length is going to give you the number of laps that the sprint race is going to have. In the sprint race, there is no mandatory need to have a pit stop. Ideally, the teams don't have a pit stop unless and until a driver has had any damages and that he needs to pit to make those changes. They would need to pit to be able to race properly for the entirety of the race. So that's when the drivers pit. Otherwise, largely there is no requirement to use different tires because it's a very short race, somewhere between 25 to 30 minutes. Yeah, and so that's the sprint format, and then the result of the sprint is going to decide the grid position for the race, and then the main event, the race event, is the same as on any other normal Formula One weekend. Yeah, so this is what a typical weekend looks like. The sprint race until last year would only give out points to the top three drivers, and that's why sprint race weekends last year were largely, to put it mildly, boring, with the exception of Brazil. But it was only because Lewis Hamilton, one of the title contenders, was disqualified from the qualifying session and had to start last, and that's why we saw like a lot of action happening on the track. But largely because the risk to reward ratio for the other drivers is very, it's not worth it to ruin your race for getting into the top three. um, so this year the FIA has decided that they are going to give points to the top 8 classification in the sprint race. So the first position is going to get 8 points, the second is going to get 7, and likewise 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for the top 8. This should make racing better. This is also the number of points are more, so it is going to have an impact on the driver standings and the driver championship. So hopefully this is going to make the sprint weekends a little bit better than what they were last year. In addition to all these points, there is also an extra point given out for the fastest lap of the race. So during the entire 90 to 120 minutes of the race that happens on Sunday, once the race is finished, the driver who has put in the fastest lap in that racing session, no other older times are counted. In that particular race session, the fastest lap, the driver who's put in the fastest lap gets one extra point. So yeah, that's it for this episode of Over the Curve. I hope this was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. If there is anything you want me to cover for in terms of Formula One and the racing and rules and regulations, please write in at overthecurve podcast@gmail.com. Since I am right now hosting this podcast alone, if you want to be a part of this, write to us at overthecurvepodcast@gmail.com. Your feedback is welcome. Please, if you like the podcast, share it with your friends. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, goodbye.